Coming up next this week in computer hardware, is Intel killing the DIY desktop? OCZ Vector, our new fave SSD, Core i5 3050p reviewed, dropping an SSD and a PS3, motherboard buying, and more. Coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 196, recorded November 29th, 2012. Intel is killing the desktop.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, and this is the show where TWiT aims to bring you the most important news and the most useful advice in computer hardware. Whether it's motherboards, CPUs, or even a tablet, we're here to answer your questions and keep you informed. Joining me, as always, is PCPro.com's Ryan Shrout. How are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty well. We were talking earlier before the show, starting to get into the CES planning. It's hard to believe that there's only a month away from CES, which is obviously a time when we get a lot of hardware news and that kind of stuff. But the planning part is always not fun.
Yeah, I always like that. I'm very excited about Christmas, the small children, the New Year's, and then the glorious march unto unpleasantness that is CES. I love CES, but I always feel broken by the end of it. Consumer Electronics Show, if you're not familiar with it, takes place generally speaking, the second week of January. It's pushed out a little bit farther now, and it is the mother of all trade shows, at least in the United States. And everybody from NVIDIA to AMD to Intel to Microsoft to pretty much any and everybody that makes consumer electronics, from Samsungs to little tiny companies that make weird little things that go on the cell phone antennas, all gather together to convince you that they have the best new thing ever. Which brings us, oddly enough, to our first story. I'm curious, do you want to talk about the Nintendo Wii U Teardown, or do you want to skip straight to the Intel Core i5 3550p Ivy Bridge CPU? Because I got to say, I've been hands-on with the Nintendo Wii U, and I still just cannot embrace the gigantic, it's the most bizarre thing. It's like a Nintendo controller mated with a 9-inch portable television from 5 years ago. With a Wii box that finally has HD,
that pretty much sums it up. Yeah, I mean, there's not too much to really talk about it. There's nothing new technologically speaking. That's not totally fair, but I just wanted to point out that the night it launched on midnight on that Saturday going into Sunday morning, we sat here for 5 hours, essentially, from 1 until 6 a.m. and took apart a Nintendo Wii U. We're the first people, actually, to take apart a Nintendo Wii U, and we had a pretty big live audience of over 1,000 people watching us try desperately not to break the hardware that I had just spent $350 on. And at the end of it, what we found out was what we kind of found out was interesting, that Nintendo was using a 5 gigahertz 802.11n controller to transmit the video between the console and the gamepad. So we kind of figured out what that was. We also learned it was based kind of on the Miracast standard, which opens up a little bit for potentially hacking and moving things around and being able to use that device for something other than just playing on a Nintendo Wii. We found out how much memory it had. We found out what speed it ran at. Nothing super dramatic. And then got to see the cool circuit board and that kind of stuff. It was more just for fun than really informational purposes, because there's no technology inside the Wii U that's really brand new or revolutionary that we haven't seen before.
I mean, essentially, it's an AMD GPU, an IBM CPU. What kind of CPU? Is it custom silicon? Is it a variation on an ARM processor, or do we really know at this point?
I mean, it's PowerPC based, but we don't really know a whole lot other than that. I think you can assume that it's very similar to the processor that was in the Wii, and very similar to the processor that's in the Xbox 360 today, just a little bit faster. The GPU
like
is significantly faster. Yeah. And the GPU is significantly faster. And that's why you're seeing the Wii U now be able to play games like Assassin's Creed 3 and Call of Duty Black Ops 2 that put it on the level or above of an Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3. But when the new consoles come out from Sony and Microsoft next year, the Wii U will still find itself back in the same position the Wii was, which is underpowered compared to the competition. So otherwise, that's it. That's pretty much all there was inside.
I'm still just delighted that they're actually breaking down and doing HD on a console.
Yeah, about time.
I love the Intel Core i5 3350P, if for no other reason that it is an Ivy Bridge CPU with actually no HD graphics component, which means, here's my question for you. 3570K performance for $50 less? Is that an accurate statement? Is it faster, slower? Because it seems like the Core i5 3570K, $220 online, it is the go-to mid-range or mid-price range CPU for gamers and anybody who does any sort of like power computing on the desktop.
Yeah, it's not quite as fast. It's pretty close. They're both quad-core, non-hyper-threaded parts, but the clock speeds in 3570K are higher by default. And it's a K-series, which means it's unlocked, which means you can overclock it a little bit easier. You're talking about a 300 megahertz difference in the base clock speed and a potential 500 megahertz difference in the max turbo frequency, right? Depending on how often you're doing strictly single-threaded applications. So that's kind of like the main performance difference. It is $50 or so less, which is still really nice. And at the end of the day, what it turned out is when I built my system, I have access to all these parts. I decided to use the 3350 because it's a lower price, and for what I'm doing on my system, which is some gaming, but mostly web usage, right? And maybe some Photoshop and that kind of stuff, but no heavy video editing or anything like that, it just made sense to get it. It's a little bit lower TDP, but not enough to be dramatically interesting. The real key is as you said, it doesn't have integrated graphics. So you need to be sure you don't want integrated graphics down the road. It also means you don't get quick sync. So if you have any applications that do transcoding that use Intel Quick Sync, you won't be able to take advantage of that. For me, that wasn't really a big deal. I think the 3350P would be a little bit better if it were closer down to its estimated price from Intel. The box price or the tray price from Intel is $177, but it's actually selling for like $189 or something like that. And that's really because only one place is stocking it right now, and that's Newegg. So once we see some other people kind of ship this and stock it, we hopefully, if this drops $10 or $15, it becomes more a better option for users that are on a tighter budget but still want decent performance.
It seems like it's literally within like 5 or 10% of a 3570K, and then the next really decent jump up in performance would be a Core i7 3770K.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so it's fairly close to the 3570 and the 3470. But when you go to the 3770, that's when you start introducing hyperthreading, and that's when, if you're doing media encoding and transcoding or rendering or anything that's highly threaded, you can get better performance in specific applications, and you get a little bit better performance if you're just doing a lot of random stuff too, on your Windows PC. But yeah, like if you look at single-threaded performance, 1.39 versus 1.44, we're talking about a difference of 5%, 5 to 10% between those same quad-core non-hyper-threaded processors. It does really well, and it can overclock. Like I got it up to 3.8 gigahertz with just a little bit of tweaking. But if you're into overclocking, it kind of just makes more sense maybe to get that K-series part, and you can do a little bit more with it. But if this is something that you are maybe just you're tight on a budget and this is what you can get, you can overclock it, and you do get some interesting results. I think if we scroll down a little bit on that page, you'll see the power consumption. That's really important too. If you look at the load peak power consumption, you'll see that it is the 3350P runs at 88 watts total, full system. Fully loaded, right? And that's with a discrete GPU installed, but it not being used, right? It's a GTX 560 Ti, and it's sitting at idle. And so you start to see that, it's running 29 to 30 watts lower than the 3770K, right? So it's a little bit better for that small form factor, a little bit better for that home theater PC, not dramatically so, but we're seeing really impressive power consumption numbers on some of these newer Intel parts.
So generally speaking, when we're talking about SSDs. Alan Malventano does the write-ups over at PCPer.com. The 830 recently replaced by the 840. By the way, if you've been thinking about buying an SSD, if you've waiting for the prices to drop, they are about as low as they're going to get right now between now and probably CES. You're looking at like $90 for a solid 120 or 128 gigabyte offering from Samsung and several other companies.
Yep.
But this is the OCZ Vector 256 gigabyte SSD, which is the latest from OCZ. It's the new Indie Links design. And I got to say, this is something kind of unprecedented. If you skip to the conclusion, excellent sequential performance, outstanding IOPS performance, low cost per gigabyte, especially for 25 nanometer flash, 7mm housing. Means you can use it in the slim notebooks and ultrabooks. A 5-year warranty, which is outstanding. And under the cons, quote, "This is rare for me," says Alan, "but I've got nothing." Seriously. Okay, it doesn't wash my dishes. So you're looking at 256 gigabyte drive for $270, MSRP. 120 gigabytes, $150, 512 gigabytes for $560. So
right.
Basically between $1.05 and $1.17 per gigabyte. So again, depending on OEM demand and how availability are, you're looking at probably a really inexpensive drive. Budget, essentially a budget consumer drive with a 5-year warranty, and it just flat out Alan was like, throughput, IOPS performance, low latency. Basically, OCZ has hit one out of the park. And, quote, "OCZ products are not just for the early adopters and power users anymore. The Vector appears to be a clear choice for the masses to enjoy," unquote. I think what we're looking at here is Alan's new favorite SSD for home builders is no longer the Samsung 840, but is the OCZ Vector. So that's pretty fair based on the podcast we recorded last night. Keep in mind that what's interesting about this part as well is it's the first completely OCZ designed controller. This is the first Indie Links that's been completely designed from the ground up since they were acquired by OCZ. So this controller will only be in OCZ drives unless something really dramatic changes. I think they'll keep this to themselves. It uses, we've got a block diagram on the first page if you're interested. It looks like any other controller. Cool. But it's got dual processors, the ARM Cortex processor and then the OCZ Aragon coprocessor, which is kind of unusual, I thought, for an SSD. Yeah, the problem is we don't really know what that Aragon processor does. It's probably handling some of the logic involved in bit remapping and that kind of stuff. Right, exactly. But yeah, like you were saying, if you look at the IOPS performance, to be honest with you, when you look at SSDs, SATA 6 SSDs are kind of hard to differentiate at this point, right. Because they're either fast enough, and then you start looking at pricing and that kind of stuff. But this is the first one we've seen in a while that really kind of stood out in terms of performance. Does that mean it's going to load your game faster? Not necessarily, but if you're a heavy multitasking user, you may see some performance advantages to that. But the real key point here is that the MSRPs are really close to what the MSRPs are on the 840s. They're lower than that, actually, and on other drives. And once these start to get into stock and start to filter out, they should be under $1 per gigabyte normal price. And that's good. That's good for consumers, right? It's like you were saying before, Black Friday and through that weekend was a great time to look for SSDs. It still is. Yeah. I was laughing because somebody was like, "Oh, the mildly obscure brand of SSD is $89." I'm like, you can buy a Samsung 830 or 840 for just $10 more. So why don't you just buy the Samsung? They were like, "Oh my goodness." Sorry, I'm just really excited that now 6 months after I bought my actually I should say about 6 weeks after I bought, actually, oddly enough, a slightly used Samsung 830 from a buddy of mine, like all of the prices have dropped down. So the nice thing is he cut me a deal on it, so I only overpaid by about $10 compared to a new drive.
That's what friends are for.
Well, at the time, it was a steal.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thought. Let's talk about Intel's Broadwell. BGA, ball grid array, essentially is the fine manufacturing art of taking a processor with a bunch of tiny little balls of solder on the bottom of it, heating up a motherboard, a chip, a PCB, putting the processor on it, and essentially sucking the solder down through a bunch of holes in the motherboard, i.e., it's something you use instead of pins. If properly assembled, it is a magnificently robust construction. If poorly implemented, it can create all sorts of problems. But generally speaking, it's not going to be an issue for major manufacturers anymore. But this is interesting. Broadwell is going to be an LGA-based product, a 14-nanometer product that will integrate Southbridge functions into the chip, so making it essentially a system on the chip. What does it really mean for everybody that it's only going to be soldered on motherboards? How does this impact people?
So the issue that it brings up is if the only way that this next generation, so keep in mind we're talking about the processor after Haswell. Haswell's kind of come out next year. This is the processor after that. And it is rumored, it's been coming out, it's leaking out that Broadwell will possibly be BGA only, which means you will only be able to buy processors not even pre-installed, pre-attached to a motherboard. So the fear is that Intel is starting the process of killing the DIY system builder by forcing CPU motherboard combinations, right? So we're used to this on maybe some mini ITX motherboards that you get with Brazos or with Atom processors and that kind of stuff, where there's no socket, you can't take the processor out. If the processor dies, you can't replace it. If you want a faster processor, you can't replace it, et cetera, et cetera. And the fear that's been going around in the hardware community over the last week or so is because we found out that Broadwell is going to be BGA only, it will be the start of a trend where from now on all Intel processors could only be available. Consumer processor, server will always will at least continue for a while, but the possibility that they're trying to end the DIY, the enthusiast, the build your own segment in that way.
Okay, Josh wrote this up over PC per Josh Walrath. Is this kind of a? I am trying to incite, anger and excitement on the interwebs, or is this? I mean, because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking this is the PC industry, right? Is Intel going to stop selling? It seems like there's a couple interesting thoughts. Is like, does this mean Asus and Gigabyte and every other motherboard manufacturer on the planet is suddenly going to be cut off? I doubt it, right? Because despite the fact that the chipsets are so tightly integrated with Intel's processors at this point, there's obviously a market for hundreds of different motherboards right now, so I don't think that market's going to go away. Is this just mean that like you're going to be forced to buy a CPU pre-installed in a motherboard? Does this mean manufacturers are going to try to figure out a way to sort of make a BGA adapter to a socket? I mean, there's just all these very smart people that like to do their own delete expletive thing over in Taiwan and Korea, and it seems like they'll continue to figure out ways to manufacture stuff.
Well, so they will, but here's what would happen is if MSI and Gigabyte and Asus want to continue to sell motherboards, they'll have to sell motherboards with processors attached. So they would buy parts from Intel and they would solder them to motherboards. And the problem that this creates is now the support is pushed onto the motherboard guys. The SKU differentiation is pushed onto the motherboard guys, right? So imagine if you're Asus and you have the P8 Z77V premium motherboard or whatever it is, but there's, I don't know, let's be reasonable and say there's 5 SKUs of Broadwell that may be interesting to DIY consumers. So if they want that motherboard to be available to all of those consumers, they have to make a version with every processor. And they have to stock them, right? And now if you have 5 motherboards and you have 5 processors, worst case scenario, you're talking about a lot of different SKUs out there. Best case scenario, you're talking about, well, okay, if I'm making a $60 motherboard, they're only really going to want a $100 processor, so we'll do that. If you want a $150 motherboard, maybe you want a $150 to a $200 processor, and we're just going to stick you that. So you either cause a lot of problems for the motherboard guys or you cause kind of a lack of additional options for consumers if they choose to go the other route.
I'm curious at some point if Intel is going to radically minimize the number of options they have. Because if you look at it right now, there's the Core i3, there's the Core i5, there's the Core i7, there's several samplings across each different design. It just seems like at this point there's so much power available, even at the Core i3 level for the average user, and at the Core i5 level, everybody but the power user pretty much has more CPU than they're ever going to need. And the Core i7s, there's people who are going to run their Core i7 at 100%. Everybody else is probably using about 20% of the CPU at any given time. I'm wondering if in the none too distant future, if they basically start, limiting the entire array, if it goes from like 15 processors to 5 or 3 processors across some basic platforms. I'm wondering at some point, if Intel starts to narrow the offerings just for simplicity and to reduce the number of SKUs they're carrying.
That's what Intel wants to do. It's not the best for the DIY enthusiasts, right? That doesn't create a lot of options for people that want to build their own systems. But I think ideally that's what Intel would love to do here's how. Let me first say, if you read Josh's editorial, which I encourage everybody to go do, he talks about that it may not be happening this way anyway because there is discussion on the chip after Broadwell returning to LGA or being available in both. But let's assume the worst case. Intel doesn't consider AMD a competitor in the desktop space anymore. So there's no reason for them to push forward with new technologies, new performance, right? And we're seeing that already, right? When we went from Linfield to Sandy Bridge to Ivy Bridge, we've seen decreases in power consumption, not increases in performance, right? A Core i7 2700K, not that much lower than a 3770K. But what we saw was a drop from a 95-watt TDP to a 77-watt TDP. And we've already seen this trend beginning. Because there's no competition, Intel doesn't need to push forward, and they would love to be able to push off the complication of this DIY market that doesn't mean that much to them in terms of their revenue off to the people that still depend on it. Asus, MSI, Gigabyte, right? Those component-based companies. So I think Intel ideally would love to not have the DIY market at all and just sell each of us a pre-built system. Or something, right? And they would, because it's just easier for them. They don't have to deal with stocking a bunch of SKUs. They don't have to deal with buying stuff back from warehouses and resellers when they're not selling and worry about dropping prices. It would be easier for them without a doubt. And there are some benefits to the consumer, but I think mostly to the people that watch this show, read PC Perspective, watch Tekzilla, that are interested in building their own machines, it is a real negative if this path does happen to take place, because even if 5 processors is enough, or 3 or 4 different CPUs is enough, and it's fast enough for most people, it's not fast enough for everybody. And those people that want that change and that differentiation may have more trouble finding it.
So when are we looking at for Broadwell rollout?
Into 2014. Maybe early 2014. So
give or take 12 to 18 months before the beginning of the end of the PC as we know it.
The potential beginning of the end, yeah. And it's. I mean, I'll be perfectly honest with you. That's a huge issue for me. My whole life and business is built on DIY computers and people wanting to build their own stuff and learn about what's different between them. If there's only 4 items for sale total, then my job becomes useless.
I don't think your job's going to be useless. I think it's really interesting to see where. I mean, it's funny. Like, it's not funny actually. I think it's going to be interesting soon. No, I mean it's really funny that right about the time we conclusively proved that PC gaming will continue to kick the ass of console gaming in terms of graphics over the long run. They finally start slowing down. It's been really curious to watch essentially the top of the line PC processors basically be back to one vendor, Intel. Not that the AMD options aren't great, but they're not the top of the line for the money in terms of performance. You've got AMD and NVIDIA. NVIDIA desperately trying to figure out a second or third major income stream to complement the GPUs. Okay. I guess I'm kind of curious, and I guess it's kind of funny because at one point I remember Dell saying like 90% of their customers never opened the box or never upgraded the box. Yeah, and it may have actually been higher than 90%. So on some level, I know there's this. We are a small but fervent group, It has always been a small group, and it's a shrinking group. Right. And from a purely business standpoint,
you understand why Intel just doesn't care anymore, right? How much money and development and margin do they lose by trying to build products to cater to this very, very specific, very, very small, very, very vocal, and annoyingly vocal at times audience, right? So,
but this is also the audience that has helped drive them, because it's like, if you've got your, cranky, let's say you get one too many drinks into Paul Otolini, and I don't know if the man even drinks or not, but it's somebody who I actually immensely respect in the industry. And I've had the chance to interview him a couple times, but I don't think he's going to be sitting there and going, the real problem is you delete expletive games reviewer, or excuse me, PC reviewer, you people with your benchmarks, because the thing is what's good for games tends to be really good for video editing and audio editing and overall computer performance and high-end CAD CAM system and engineering boxes and servers. I mean, obviously servers have evolved into something strange and wonderful and totally bizarre. Just ask Alan. But the reality is I think a lot of what's good for computing overlaps directly with what's good for gamers and enthusiasts. But
I think the server market will continue the way it is, and maybe to a certain level the workstations. But think of where the lowest price Xeon processors start, right? And they're higher margins because of that. I don't think Intel thinks the DIY market is a problem. I just think they will eventually realize that it doesn't matter to them, and they'll just become ambivalent and just kind of move on, right? So
sounds a lot like Apple in the desktop market.
Yeah, they're just like, well, sure, here's something, I guess, but it doesn't really matter, because Intel's target is now Qualcomm. It's not AMD. It's not the desktop market. Now it's the mobile market. Now it's tablets. Now it's cell phones and all that other crap. So they are potentially going to kind of focus on that direction. So we will see. This will be something we monitor for a long time.
I mean, is this the beginning of the ends of PC gaming and GPUs?
I mean, that's what we've been saying since the introduction of processor-based graphics, right? But it's kind of becoming true on the notebook front, right? You look at the notebooks. Ivy Bridge had much better graphics. NVIDIA still had increased market share, but at the expense of AMD. When you look at Haswell, it's going to be even more so and more so and more so. Will they be able to keep up? I think, if you're asking my personal opinion, long-term, build your own PC enthusiasts will be like the car enthusiasts today. You don't get a lot of options anymore. Like, look at what the car market is today versus what it was in the 70s, right? You get a lot of consolidation. If you go to buy transmission, how many options do you get? You probably get one. And it's a very small vocal market, but it will never completely go away, but it will get smaller and smaller and smaller. The number of people that work on their own cars now down dramatically, right? And the people who work on the computers will continue to go down too.
Yeah, I don't know. I might argue with you about that, because SEMA, the Specialty Equipment Market Association, the trade group that represents everything from tire to wheel manufacturers to aftermarket to performance to air fresheners to pretty much anything that could go on or inside of a car. I want to say they're looking at like $30 billion a year in sales. So
I don't know what that is compared to everything, but if you look at people that work on their own cars and do their own mechanical work and maintain their own cars, I guess I don't have any numbers for sure, but I'm going to guess that has been decreasing and decreasing over the years. And I think it'll be the same thing with PC, but it will never, ever go away completely. There will always be that group of people that wants that. So, but I think what will happen is, relatively speaking, things may become more expensive because of it, because it's a smaller market.
I think, as someone who works on all three of the vehicles that my family owns, you may be shocked at how many people are out there working on their own cars. Just saying.
I hope.
Two quick things before we go. When we come back, let's talk about a couple things before we get to our viewer questions. One, love it or hate it, Windows 8 has sold 40 million licenses in the first month. We don't really have any breakdown on Microsoft as to how many of those licenses are sold with pre-configured PCs and how many of those are standalone copies. It may not really matter, because Windows 7 sold a total of 60 million licenses in 2 months. So it's going to be really interesting to see if we get another press release or blog entry from Microsoft regarding the total number of sales in the first 2 months of the new operating system. And there's an interesting rumor going out about the next generation Microsoft operating system, and rumor is the big word here. Codenamed Windows Blue, quote, a low-cost upgrade for existing Windows users that will be based on a subscription service for updates.
Do you like that idea?
I don't like that idea. I take that back. I am cautious about the idea because at one hand, it's like, hey, I've got a MacBook Air in front of me, and I got a brand new operating system for it for $20. That was a pretty good deal. So if it's updates like that, I don't want to pay $20 every quarter to get the security updates I need to keep my Windows box from being rooted, or because I need new drivers or something like that. So, this also comes back to something that we see all over both mobile and desktops, where the people that control the operating system are slowly but surely forcing applications to be installed from some sort of, and this has been, iOS, iPhone, without jailbreaking it, the only way to load an application into the device is through the store, right? Unless you jailbreak it and do some pretty serious changes to the device. But, we see in OS X where Apple has released their store, the App Store, and I really don't think it's going to be too long before they manage to force all software installations on OS X to be through the App Store. That may be my level of paranoia on this, but it's something I don't look forward to because, quite frankly, I don't particularly need Steve Jobs' morality or some of the unbelievably arcane, stupid, and ridiculous business decisions from some major companies to decide whether or not I can load a particular application onto my device, whether that device is a desktop or a notebook or a phone. Right. That said, obviously, I'm still carrying an iPhone, so apparently I'm not that bothered by it. But, I can see myself sort of meandering closer and closer to a Ubuntu Linux lifestyle on my PCs. But as you pointed out earlier, PCs are apparently going to turn into irritating little appliances with no soul that, are fundamentally disposable by nature. So, yeah. So Windows Blue subscription service details are basically non-existent, but I think it's going to be interesting to see what the cost is on that. And it may be so low that nobody really cares. But, I somehow suspect we will all look at the number and be irritated by it. But that's just my faith in PC users' ability to be irritated by anything that Microsoft does. So we fire out a few viewer questions.
Absolutely.
Adam's got a question about using a solid-state drive in a PS3. He says, hey, guys, this is not necessarily a computer question, but it does involve computing hardware, or computer hardware as he types. He says, I just bought one of the new-style PS3s with a 500-gigabyte hard drive. My question is, do either of you have any experience with swapping the stock spinning disk drive in the PS3 with an SSD? I love the quick loading times and performance gain an SSD gives me with my desktop and laptop, but I'm not sure if there would be much of a gain with the PlayStation 3. I found completely conflicting info online about this issue. Some people say it does nothing. Some people swear by it. With 120 to 128 gigabyte SSDs hitting the sub-$90 price range, yes. I'm thinking about trying this out and using the original 500 gigabyte PS3 hard disk drive in my desktop. I could always use extra storage. What do you guys think? Win-win situation or waste of time and money? Adam, I am fascinated by your question, and I am completely console-free.
It's actually a really cool idea. It's the only console that you can switch the drive in, right? The Microsoft Xbox 360 drive is encased in all this weird crap and doesn't use a standard SATA connector.
Yeah, it's fundamentally locked down on the Xbox.
Right. And you can take out the hard drive from your PS3 and hook it up to a computer and literally mirror it and move on. And there have been lots of people that have used SSDs. I haven't personally done it either. He said he'd read conflicting views online, but all the stuff I've read, it wasn't conflicting so much that they were saying that it doesn't increase performance in all games. But in some games, games that do heavy texture streaming, right? Games that you would typically have to install to the hard drive anyway, or would want to install to the hard drive anyway, you will see performance advantages. There's no doubt in my mind that you will see performance gains. It's how dramatic they actually are. Expect load levels to be a little faster. Expect texture streaming in, like on a game like Rage or something like that, where a lot of data has to come in from the hard drive very quickly. Right. I would expect you to see differences. Will you see enough to warrant, a 256 gig SSD for your drive, for your PS3? Right. I don't know about that, right? I mean, depends on how much capacity you're using on your PS3. Some of those single game installs can be 30 gigs, 30, 40 gigs worth of data. So you can't do a whole bunch of them at one time anyway.
Well, if you take a look at Eurogamer.net, which was a website I'd never really heard of until I started searching around on this, can SSD upgrades boost PS3 performance? Digital Foundry tests Skyrim, Rage, and a bunch of hard drive intensive titles. They did this back in February this year. And it's quote, previous research has suggested the advantages of running an SSD in a PS3 are slight, to say the least. Indeed, Digital Foundry's PS3 hard drive upgrade guide struggled to find many advantages. Loading times are improved on many titles such as Gran Turismo 5, and you can save seconds or even minutes off lengthy mandatory installs, but there's little evidence that in-game performance is affected at all, unquote. So what's interesting is, and of course I'm not going to be able to find the paragraph, but part of what's going on is the PS3 can't stream data quickly enough because essentially it all has to be buffered before it's loaded into the CPU, and there's only so much RAM available on the PS3. But one of the things that the Eurogamer article points out is that, quote, the 0.1 millisecond access time on the SSD wins out, and that's effectively a standard on all makes. There's some issues about trim support and some other stuff, but they basically said you'll get improved install and loading times on a great many games, but not all. Quote, in key titles that really hammer the hard drive, there may well be some performance improvements, but not enough to justify the expense unless you really, really, really like Rage, unquote. They basically point out that an SSD upgrade on a notebook is a no-brainer. An SSD upgrade on a desktop PC, whether it's running OS X, Linux, or Windows, is a no-brainer. But the PS3 it's not so much of a no-brainer. But basically, it's kind of funny. What's kind of funny is RAM's. The amount of RAM available on the current generation consoles from Xbox or from Microsoft and Sony are essentially really slow PCs by today's standards. So it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea. Some games will benefit. Some games you probably won't notice, and it shouldn't really impact game performance at all for the most part. But I will cut and paste that into the show notes so people can find that article on there. So I wouldn't say it's a waste of time and money, but don't expect to get your socks knocked off the way you would if you were upgrading a PC or a Macintosh. Aaron emailed about bricking his boss's motherboard. He says, so I was asked to upgrade the BIOS on my boss's PC. Let's just say the flash didn't end well, and he bricked the board. I followed the upgrade steps properly and even confirmed the proper steps with the vendor's tech support. Normally, it's a bad thing to fry your boss's personal belongings, but he's a good guy, and we've been working together for about 13 years. He bought a new motherboard and moved on, spilling only a few mildly choice words. Since the bricked board, an MSI P67A GD65 was under warranty, he told me that if I took care of the warranty process and paid for the shipping, it was mine. $15 later, I'll have myself a somewhat recent motherboard. I'm currently on a 4-plus-year-old Core 2 Duo, so this would be the start of a good upgrade. Is there any advantage or issues with dropping an Ivy Bridge CPU into this board, or is it best paired with a Sandy Bridge part? Normally, I'd just go for a decent Z77 board, but spending $15 versus $150 is awfully nice. What do you
Hard
think,
to argue with that.
Oh, sorry?
I said hard to argue with that statement. $15 for motherboard. Are there any advantages or issues? The advantages of using an Ivy Bridge part is that it's going to be a little bit faster. Are there going to be any issues? No. As long as you check that BIOS for that P67A and it says it supports third generation Intel Core micro architecture processors, whatever they call it, or if it says supports Ivy Bridge processors, then you'll be good to go. But make sure you double check that. Maybe read around in some forums and stuff, because there's really nothing more annoying than getting a processor and a motherboard and finding out that the processor doesn't work with that board until you do a flash update or something like that, but you don't have that extra processor with which to do the update. Some of the new
can I borrow your CPU for an hour?
Yeah. Some new Asus motherboards actually could do a BIOS flash update without a processor, which is really, really, really cool. I don't think any MSI boards do that yet, but I wanted to look here real quick and see if the MSI board listed it. If it does list it, yeah, there's no reason not to get an Ivy Bridge part unless you can find a good deal on a Sandy Bridge or something like that.
There you have it. Go forth and buy your CPU of choice.
Yeah.
Just check for the support first before you drop the cash on that new CPU. Dave's got a question about upgradable laptops. He says, "Oh, great lore masters of hardware, I beseech thee." Wow. When buying a laptop, is it even worth thinking about future upgrades? I have heard of a very few select models in which people have successfully upgraded off-board graphics, and many friends have slapped more RAM in their portable rigs, but I've never heard of an upgrade path for CPUs or for the majority graphics. With the advent of Thunderbolt, would it be worth looking into running an external GPU? Is it even possible to upgrade the CPU in a modern laptop? Two of the previous laptops I own, the CPU is difficult to reach at the very best. Is the only upgrade option really to add RAM? I dream of a world with replaceable parts and upgrade paths for a chassis, a modular world in which one could pick up a power GPU to throw in for gaming on the go and easily remove it so that it doesn't draw any current at all for work or school. Perhaps swapping glass with a higher resolution, a 1080p screen for 17-inch or 16:9 for 15-inch form factors. Maybe even slapping a quality membrane board in to replace the typically crappy ones that come with notebooks. Until that day comes, and I know it probably won't, but I can hope. What, if anything, is upgradable in today's notebooks? First of all, I want to say try a Lenovo keyboard and some of the Dell XPS keyboard, but the Lenovo keyboards are kind of the gold standard for keyboards in notebooks, especially the ThinkPad series. I have spent many thousands of hours typing, or at least hundreds and dozens of hundreds of hours typing on Lenovo keyboards on ThinkPads, and it is a wonderful experience.
I just ordered my third consecutive ThinkPad X200 series laptop after like literally testing a half a dozen Ultrabooks, finally going, you know what, this is stupid. I'm just going to get a ThinkPad again. Get the X230 with, you'll like this, you'll appreciate this, 15 total cells of battery.
Nice.
So
that a slice in addition to the main battery?
Yep.
Yeah, you'll be computing all day and all night long, baby.
I hope so.
And here's the problem, right? We all dream of upgradable notebooks, Dave. The problem is let's ignore the fact that most notebooks for most manufacturers are assembled by 3 or 4 giant companies, and that most notebooks essentially have what we think of as a co-designed motherboard, where basically it's an Intel processor and an Intel chipset and a relatively standard set of components wrapped around that. Because once you get beyond that point, everything gets different. And there's no standardized, because there is so much creativity and engineering possibility around figuring out ways to make things thinner or lighter or different or funkier or funner or whatever that particular manufacturer is aiming for in that particular notebook design, is that there's no real standard for the motherboards. And, you know, space is so critical, especially what they call Z, the depth on the notebook. The idea of having the additional space between the CPU and the motherboard to support pins basically went away years and years and years ago. And because the number of laptops with discrete graphics has never been particularly large, the replaceable GPUs for notebooks and laptops thing never really took off in a big way. Generally speaking, there's 2 things you can upgrade in a notebook: memory, unless it's soldered onto the motherboard with no additional memory expansion opportunities like the MacBook Air and a bunch of the new Ultrabooks, and your hard drive. And hard drive, especially if you have a rotating media hard drive going from a traditional hard drive to an SSD, is a huge and life-changing, well, maybe not life-changing, but it's if you're a freaking hard drive nerd, getting an SSD in your notebook will be an awesome experience. And it'll just be really, really nice for everybody who's not so into the performance upgrades. I mean, it's an awesome dream, and maybe Intel is pushing us towards that, but I kind of doubt it. because there's
Intel is not pushing us towards that.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, just on the desktop.
Right. No, I got
wait, it's not upgradable, but it is modular. And you just replaced the whole little biscuit computer.
So I had a thing where yesterday, you can do a little bit more when you get into like the big gaming laptops.
Yeah.
Like the M17X, you can take it apart and you can take the MXM module with the GPU off, and you can take out the 2 hard drives, and you can take out the memory. There was at one point a processor socket for mobile CPUs, but that went away very quickly. And even though the idea of an MXM module, like I was able to swap a Radeon HD 6990M and put in a 7970M and a GTX 680M into the same machine, and that's pretty good. But that's only because I had access to these parts from people at NVIDIA and AMD. They're not retail available. You can't buy them through Dell's website or anything like that. So they're not really user upgradable. It would be good, but I don't think it's a disappointing trend. But the trend is to get laptops that are thinner and lighter, which means you have less and less option. You have non-replaceable batteries. I can't add memory to this system even, right? So we're once again kind of going in the other direction of that for different market reasons. People are looking for different things as hardware becomes, what do we call it? Replaceable, like, throwaway. You just, instead of upgrading, you just buy a new one, right? So people are going that direction. And because of that, there's less emphasis put on the capability to upgrade. I mean, look at all these notebook reviews that are out there from just about anybody and see if there's a section on what parts can you upgrade. And I'm willing to bet that very few people even report on that stuff anymore because nobody really cares. That's something I care about. I want to know, can I, like that Lenovo X230, I ordered it with one 4GB DIMM and the cheapest hard drive I could because I know that I can go buy an SSD cheaper and install it myself. And I know I can get 8 gigs of memory for $12 from Newegg instead of $100 from Lenovo and install it and run that way, right? And it's just not something that's as important to many people.
That train, as they say, has left the station.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think it makes anybody, that happy. But the reality is yeah. It's a good dream, Dave.
Yeah.
I will share it with you. One last one before we go. Adam, talking about LGA 2011 motherboards.
Sure.
Says, hey guys, getting close to my next PC build. First in 3 or 4 years, upgrading from a Core i7-920 to a Core i7-3930K. I really want the 6-core 12-thread and overclocking. Ivory 6-core is too far off for me, but my question is about motherboards. I thought I remember hearing you guys say that there was going to be an LGA 2011 refresh in early 2013. Can you share any more details? My main question is, should I wait? Currently, I'm looking at an Asus P9 X79 Pro. What do you think, man? Buy it?
I think there will be a refresh early next year, but there's not going to be huge differences. You should wait if one of two things. There's a specific feature you want. Like, the only one I can think of would be Thunderbolt. Will there be a X79 motherboard that comes out in January with Thunderbolt? I honestly have no clue, but I'm going to guess yes, that there will be one. Maybe I don't know. If that's what you want, then wait. If you don't really care about Thunderbolt, I can't think of anything that's going to happen suddenly where the motherboard designs are really going to change dramatically. Most of the time when we get into these refreshes, it's because companies like Asus and MSI and Gigabyte have kind of run through their stock of X79 and like, well, rather than reproduce the same thing, let's make a couple of tweaks and then reproduce the same thing, right? So if you want it now, I don't really see a problem with buying stuff, buying a board. And like I said, if the interesting refreshes will happen in the $300 to $500 motherboard range, and if you're not in that range anyway, might not even matter to you.
And so the short answer is, if you don't want Thunderbolt, buy now.
Yeah, pretty much.
Adam, I hope that helped you out. Ladies and gentlemen, we love it when you listen to the show. We love you to listen to all of our shows. And if you haven't actually found out where you can get all of the shows, let me help you. twit.tv/twitch. TWICH, twit.tv/twitch is the place where you can basically subscribe to the show, find out all the information about all the older shows, or you can just search inside your favorite podcaster, whether it's iTunes or something else. Pardon me while I start hiccuping here. And we love your email questions. So do us a favor, email us. Twitch, TWICH at twit.tv is the place to go if you want to get your hardware questions answered. Is things chilling down for the holiday shopping season at PC Per, or is there a lot of excitement going on over there? In fact, I think there's a little square box of Intel Doomy Future sitting next to you right now.
Well, this is interesting. We'll have a review up on this in the next couple of days at PCPer.com. This is the Intel NUC, the next unit of computing, and it's a kind of a DIY machine. You add your own storage, you add your own wireless, you add your own memory, but that's pretty much it. But it's, a 4-inch by 4-inch by 2-inch machine that has Thunderbolt and HDMI and USB and that kind of stuff. So it's interesting. We also have things are not slowing down here because we're getting everybody's kind of. It's an interesting time in the mobile laptop and tablet world because all the people are in this mix where CES is in January, so they're going to have new things to show, but they have all these laptops that they showed last year that couldn't be released until November anyway. So they're still just kind of coming out with stuff at this time too. So we have, I'm looking at the dry erase board in terms of our reviews, and there's a lot of words on it. So there must be a lot of stuff coming soon. I hope.
Funny how that works.
Yeah.
You mentioned it before we started recording the show, or maybe we mentioned it in the show. Super Electronics Show is coming, and we started booking appointments for that. That doesn't really hit until January. But it's been an interesting week at Techzilla because we've talked about burning into PCs. We've had Lori Gruden on from CNET to talk about her picks for the best digital cameras on the market right now. We've looked at SSD deals, bargain AV receivers. Robert Heron put together his legendary, what I think of as his I want list for his ultimate home theater build out, which he referred to as the whiny single guys, his whiny single guy rant. I was making fun of him. I'm putting a new heater in my house. He was like, I'm whining, aren't I? I'm like, no, you're just excited. And actually, we had one of the new Puget Systems Serenity Pros. We did a teardown on that earlier this week. I shouldn't say teardown. We opened it up, unboxed it, and opened it up. And I'm playing around with that on my desktop right now. And it's kind of amazing how quiet a PC can be these days. Because when you're sitting there at 2 in the morning and you're like, is that thing on? Oh, wait. I'm computing on it right now. It must be on. So, exciting stuff.
Yep.
And actually, finally, the legendary $35 desktop, or whether or not you can actually use a Raspberry Pi as a desktop PC.
Nice.
There's nothing stranger than looking at your PC as you look at the Raspberry Pi board and realize that the keyboard and motherboard you're using actually cost more than the PC they are attached to.
Yes. Yes. It's like using a $95 mouse.
Exactly.
What are you doing?
In this case, it's like a $50, $60 motherboard keyboard combo. That's about it for this week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week.
How many people updated iTunes today and then restarted the program and went, what? Because I know somebody in this office did. And then for the next 15 minutes, he struggled to figure out how to get back to the old view of...
Yeah, completely redesigned for your viewing, listening, browsing, and shopping pleasure. The new iTunes makes it easier than ever to browse and organize your music, movies, and TV shows. Add to your collection and play it all anywhere. See what's new in iTunes. Yeah, I always get really afraid when I hear language like that describing something.
Yeah, you should.
I install it on my least used PC first because I know there's going to be pain and suffering involved.
The title should be something about Intel attempting to kill the desktop.
Intel's killing the desktop.
Bacon pancakes, making bacon pancakes.
Coming up next is Big Computer Hardware.
Making pancakes.
Making pancakes.
Make some bacon, and then you put it in the pancake. Bacon pancakes, that's what we're going to make. Bacon pancakes.